Guys, Charles here. Let's do some price floors and price ceilings. These are fairly straightforward. Not micro or macro. Sometimes teachers teach. I can't find one single multiple choice question for a macro exam on price floors and price ceilings. They are on micro, obviously. But we do sort of see this sort of referred to when we're talking about macro. It is part of the curriculum, at least how things change. Anyway, let's just jump to it. Price floors and price ceilings. First of all, you should know consumer surplus and producer surplus. Just where we always tend to start is we're going to start with our supply and demand curve. You should know clearly that that's the equilibrium price. That's the quantity. We'll call it QE and PE. All of this triangle right here is consumer surplus. All of this triangle right here is producer surplus. Before anything happens, before there's any price floors and ceilings, we can see clearly that this is a consumer surplus and producer surplus, and that all this area is both of those. Again, this is important to know where these things are, to identify them. You should be able to define consumer and producer surplus. You should have talked a little bit about that, at least for micro. How to define it, how to recognize it, how to identify it, and then how to calculate it. I don't think we have any questions about calculating it for price floors and price ceilings. But you should know that consumer surplus is everything above the price, but below the demand curve. This is helpful for being able to find everything. Here's our price, everything above the price, but below that demand curve right there is all consumer surplus. Producer surplus is everything below the price, right? But above the supply curve. Recognize that everything above the supply curve but below the price is all producer surplus. Know that consumer surplus, a good definition of it, is the difference between what people are willing to pay compared to what they actually have to pay. So the difference between these two, what you're willing to pay, that's what the demand curve shows us, is what people are willing to pay and what they actually have to pay, which is the equilibrium price. So those differences are consumer surplus. That's a definition. This is how you can always find it or identify it. You should know both of these. They like to ask those when we're doing producer or price floors and price ceilings. So let's slide down a little bit and let's just draw in. There's a little mantra we have. We say that floors are high and ceilings are low. This tells us how to draw these things in. So if I'm drawing in a floor, floors are high, it has to be above the equilibrium price. This is a price floor. It has to go in above the equilibrium price. A price ceiling has to go below. So we're just going to draw a nice price ceiling below equilibrium, and we're going to label it price ceiling, price ceiling. Easy enough. Ceilings are low, floors are high. You have to know that. The understanding here is that price floors are like minimum wages. Think about that. If the equilibrium price, let's say I'm paying everybody $10 an hour already in my restaurant. And then all of a sudden the government comes in and they put a price floor, and this is like the price I'm paying right here. I'm paying everybody $10 an hour. And the government walks in and says, hey, you got to pay everybody at least $8 an hour. That's their price floor. It's a minimum price, a minimum wage that you can pay people. Well, I'm already paying everybody 10. Does the $8 affect, is it effective? Does it affect me and make me do anything different? Is it binding? Does it cause any problems or make me change how much I pay people? No. Any minimum wage or any price floor that is below the equilibrium has absolutely no effect. It's almost like it just doesn't exist. So we just tend to ignore it. So price floors have to be above the equilibrium to be effective or binding. We need to know both of that language there, effective or binding. Price floors have to be above the equilibrium. And then we're going to do the same things with all of these. We're going to find quantity demanded, how much is demanded, at this price floor. So we're going to go to the price floor where it starts. We go straight across. And I'm going to change my color just a little bit here. I don't know if that'll help, but it makes me feel better. So we're going to cut it straight across, tick, 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 till we hit the demand curve. At this price, that's our quantity demanded right there, right? Then we keep going across, tick, 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 till we hit the supply curve. We go straight down. That's the quantity supplied at that price. At this high price, suppliers will supply a lot of it, but at the high price, people don't want as much of it. Recognize originally we had this amount of quantity that was being produced. That was where quantity demanded equaled quantity supplied. And then when the price goes up, people want less of it. Quantity demand decreases, but suppliers want to supply a lot of it because the price is high, so they will supply more of it. What we recognize is that anytime quantity supplied is greater than quantity demand, anytime quantity supplied is greater than quantity demand, we have a surplus. Easy, right? Price floors always lead to surpluses. And this is how you'll explain it on an FRQ. You can simply write that and you get all your points. Quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. Done. We should recognize, though, that what society actually gets here, well, I'll ask you the question. Does society get what's supplied, or does society actually get what they can afford? Tricky the way they word those questions sometimes, but recognize at a high price, this is all society gets, right? It doesn't matter that all that's on the market. They can only buy this amount. So this is actually how much society would put in their pocket, right? So we recognize that there's been some loss of quantity that society has. We could say there's been a loss of what we call total welfare. We could also call it a loss of total surplus. And that leads us back to going to the understanding that there has been a loss of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Recognize that these two surpluses together are what we call total surplus. Obviously, it's welfare of society, how it benefits society, right? And because of the high price and people get less of this good, people are worse off. Now, that's where our deadweight loss comes in. We have to recognize that this is our deadweight loss triangle. Now, originally, I'm going to change my color again because I think it's important to recognize this. Well, it is important because they like to ask the question. That was our original price, the blue or whatever color it is. I'm colorblind. And all of that triangle right there was consumer surplus. All of this was consumer surplus, right? All of this down here was producer surplus, all of that triangle right there. But when there's a high price floor, people get less of this good. And since that quantity is not attained by society, all of this consumer and producer surplus is lost. That's why we tend to define deadweight loss as a loss of consumer surplus and producer surplus. It's a loss of quantity that society would have received. It's also a loss of total surplus, right? Which just implies it's both of those being lost. Again, our consumer surplus is everything above the price, but below the demand curve, right? So this triangle right here is all of our new consumer surplus. This area right here, everything below the price, right? Everything below our price floor price, everything above the supply curve, is all producer surplus, right? So we need to know consumer surplus and producer surplus before a price floor or price ceilings. When there's a price floor enacted or imposed, we need to be able to find quantity demand and quantity supplied. We need to recognize that when quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, there's a surplus. We need to be able to calculate that surplus, right? We need to be able to find consumer surplus after the price floor and the producer surplus after the price floor. And we need to be able to know where deadweight loss is and recognize it and calculate it if they ask. Just the area of a triangle, as is consumer surplus is the area of a triangle. A lot of stuff, but if you know all of that, there tend to not be anything else they tend to ask you. So if you know all of that, you can kind of wash your hands and go, okay, I'm pretty good with price floors and price ceilings. Let's do it again for a price ceiling here. I'm kind of throwing, and then we're going to do multiple choice questions of what we see from some of our micro exams there. So They're going to ask you to draw in the price ceiling. You draw it in. They're going to ask you about quantity demanded. Now, this is the tricky part here. When I go to my price ceiling and I go tick, tick, tick across, the first curve I come to is the supply curve. This is quantity supply. Don't get confused, right? It isn't just it is the curve you hit that makes it important. And with that low price, the first curve we're going to hit is quantity supply. Obviously, we keep going across, tick, 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 till we hit quantity demanded, or the demand curve. That's our quantity demanded. At this low price, people want a lot of this. We can see that originally this was our quantity supplied equaled our quantity demanded at that point right there. But then due to the low price that the government has imposed, people want a lot of this good because the price is so low. But suppliers supply less of it because the price is so low. They don't make as much profit, so they don't make as much of it. So we can see that quantity demand is greater than quantity supplied. Anytime quantity demand is greater than quantity supplied, you have a shortage, right? So shortages, anytime we're talking about price ceilings, we're talking about shortages. Now, to be a binding or effective price ceiling, it has to be below the equilibrium for the same reason that a price floor has to be above. They don't tend to ever ask you to explain that, but you should be able to recognize that if they give you a price ceiling that is above the equilibrium and they ask you how it changes, it doesn't affect anything. It doesn't change anything. That would still be our equilibrium price and quantity. Price ceilings above equilibrium drawn up here do absolutely nothing. So we have to know that so that they can't trick us with their questions. Good job. All right, let's keep blowing our way through this. My questions to you would be, with this price ceiling, where is our deadweight loss? And this is confusing. Remember, here's our price floor. Remember now that we went to the price floor. This showed what society got right there. This is what they used to get before the price floor. All that's deadweight loss. It's the same thing over here. Just go straight across to hit the supply. Go straight up. Recognize that all of this is deadweight loss. Before the price ceiling, all of this was consumer surplus, that triangle. So we've lost that amount of consumer surplus. All of this triangle down here was a price floor. We've lost that amount of price floor. Society is worse off. They do like to question us sometimes. That is deadweight loss right in there, by the way. They do like to question us sometimes, how much does society actually get? At the low price, people demand that much, but the suppliers are only supplying that much. So this quantity supply there is what is actually produced and attained by society. This is what society achieves or gets, is that quantity supply. Society is worse off because they only get that. So we've lost some quantity here that society had. We've lost some welfare. We've lost some total surplus. We can see we've lost consumer and producer surplus. Now, due to the low price, those who actually get the good, all of this area is consumer surplus. But due to the low price, producers lose in this situation. That's the producer surplus triangle right there. Did we forget anything? Price ceilings below, quantity supplied, quantity demand, shortage, know where consumer and producer surplus is, know that what society actually gets of this good. You can do all of that, right? And you know price ceilings are below the equilibrium to be binding or effective. Pretty golden with most of the questions. They can be tricky sometimes, but if you know that information and you can draw this graph out and show and identify all these parts and how they change, pretty golden. Let's just practice some of these, see if we can do a few of these. From 1995, which of the following is true of a price floor? Now, if you want to stop it for a second and read through all these and choose what you think is the right answer, that's cool. I'm going to read it quickly and then just answer it for us. This was a fairly old question, right? A price floor would set prices high. This one is a little bit strange. I don't think I've ever seen another question like this, but it's the idea that setting prices high helps producers. Obviously, it would not help consumers. And it's a bit of a weird question, I would agree. But those high prices are usually set by politicians to help like farmers, right? And the farmers are an interesting situation in that if they have a really good year and they do everything right and the weather works with them, what tends to happen is there's a bumper crop. And if there's a bumper crop, then the price falls, right? There's so much goods on the market that the price falls and harmers are harmed. So it tends to be that in those situations, lots of times politicians will actually bump up the price. Does it cause harm? Absolutely. It helps the farmers who are actually able to sell something, but it makes consumers poorer. But this tends to be the reason why it happens. All right, let's don't spend too much time on that. Number 50, which of the following is true in the market for a certain product if producers consistently are willing to sell more at the going price than consumers are willing to buy? Now, this is just the idea that we have to recognize what they're talking about is a price floor. A situation where producers are willing to sell more, meaning that there's a surplus provided, right? That's quantity supplied, that's quantity demanded. With a price floor, we know there's a surplus, then consumers are willing to buy. Again, it's a very old question and it's a little weirdly worded, but it's nice to see it and know it. If we see it again on a test, we should be able to answer it, right? These are the things that let us know in that situation, there's always going to be a surplus due to those high prices imposed by the government. All right, let's keep going here. Number 18, 2000. They're just asking for consumer surplus at competitive equilibrium. Again, competitive equilibrium is just where supply and demand come together. Again, it's the strange language of the College Board. Once you see it a few times, it shouldn't surprise you, but the first time you see it, it might be confusing. It was for me anyway. This is competitive equilibrium. Buyers and sellers are competing against each other. That's the price, that's the quantity. We should know that all this triangle up here is consumer surplus. All this triangle down here is producer surplus. We just can know it and recognize it. To give them that triangle, we give them the corners, right? So W, Y, Z. W, Y, Z. Looks like B it is. All right. I'm going to get rid of some of this. It's a little sloppy. There we go. All right. If a price floor is set at X, now I'm like a child with these. I'm going to go in. I'm going to draw my price floor because that makes me happy. I'm going to label it a price floor. I recognize if the price is jacked up to X, this becomes, because I'm hitting the demand curve here, my quantity demanded. This becomes my quantity supplied. I know with price floors, I've got a surplus. All of this should be running through your brain. As soon as you saw the question about a price floor, you know the kind of things they're going to ask you. I know where deadweight loss is. I know where my new consumer surplus is. I know all of that's producer surplus. You should be able to do that click, click, click just that fast so that you know what they're going to ask. Let's see. If the price floor is set at X, the quantity demanded will be an increase, decrease. Well, originally, Y was the price. S was the quantity demanded. Now, due to the high prices, people want less of this good. We went from S to R. Now, this is kind of weird, right? 0 to S. We went from 0 to S to 0 to R. Bit tricky. It decreased from OS to OR. Can you see that? If not, go back and take a look at that question, see if you can make sense of it again. Do it a couple times. Label in everything. Know what's going on so that you have that stuff in your brain and you can pull it out if you need to. All right, 2000. Let's take a look at this one. The graph above shows the supply and demand curve for gasoline. Which of the following would occur if the government establishes a price ceiling at 120? So equilibrium's at $1. Think about that for a second, and then I'm going to answer it. What we should know as soon as I talk about price ceilings, I know floors are, well, you should say it, floors are high, say it every time so it sticks in your brain. Ceilings are low. We're training ourselves to answer these questions correctly. So the more we say this like it's a mantra, the better we are, right? Floors are high, ceilings are low. So if they've said, which would occur if the government established a price ceiling at $1.20. Now, you and I know price ceilings can be put up there, but they do absolutely nothing. To be binding or to be effective, price ceilings have to be low. So this price ceiling would not change anything because it's above the equilibrium, neither a surplus or a shortage. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's keep going. 32. There's only like 7 of these. 1 a year, maybe 2 a year at the most. Anyway, but we can be pretty sure we're going to see 1 on the test. And the market shown above at a price of $5. Now, this question's a little strange. They don't tell us it's a price ceiling or a price floor. We just kind of have to recognize that if this is equilibrium and they put in, nobody's putting in, let me say that differently. The price is suddenly $5. What we should recognize, though, by knowing our price floors and price ceilings, is if the price is above equilibrium, suppliers are going to supply a lot of it. That's our quantity supplied. And quantity demanded would be here. So at a higher price than equilibrium, what we know is it tends to, think about this, if you're a producer and all of a sudden you got 50,000 tomatoes you're sitting on, wouldn't you lower the price to get rid of them? They're going to spoil fairly quickly. So what we know is the supply of things, when their price is above equilibrium, it tends to push the price down. Obviously, people don't want as much at that, so to sell more, you lower the price and people would want more of it. So anytime the price is above equilibrium, these sort of characteristics kind of push it back to equilibrium. So there would be a surplus. We know that if the price is higher than equilibrium, because they're not going to be able to sell all of it. These people don't want all of it. So there'd be a surplus and the price will eventually fall. In the long run, tends to be that suppliers will lower their price so that they can sell more of this good. This is more of a characteristic of just knowing what's about if that price is above equilibrium. All right. Let's do number 3 here from 2010. When the market is in equilibrium, could we call it competitive equilibrium? We could, only if you wanted to be tricky. I spelled that wrong, but that's okay. The total economic surplus. Total surplus is consumer surplus and producer surplus added together. We could refer to that as total welfare. They have referred to it as total welfare, or we could call it total surplus. Easy enough. We should know both of these, all of these. So if we're at equilibrium, we know that this triangle, everything above the price but below demand is consumer surplus. Everything below the price but above the supply curve is producer surplus. They're looking for areas, so it looks like FGH and then IJK. IJK. That is our total surplus, total welfare, or total economic surplus. Just adding another word in there to try to make it confusing, right? So we got it, good. And I'm going to get rid of this because it's a little hard to see all of that. All right. And if a price ceiling is set at P1, now, first thing I recognize is this price ceiling, it is below the equilibrium. I know it's binding or effective. So I know it is binding, it is effective, it's below the equilibrium, so I know it's an actually effective price ceiling. I know it's going to change some stuff. Let's just run through it like we did before. You should know where everything is. The more you do it, the better you'll be at it. And you can look at these graphs and just know what's going on. I start at my P1. I go straight across till I hit the supply curve there, QS. Keep going across till I hit the demand curve. That's my QD. I can see that quantity demand is greater than quantity supplied, right? I know that anytime demand is greater than supply, I have what we call a shortage. They don't ask that. I don't care. I need to know it anyway. I also know that this is what society actually gets, what's produced, not how much they demand. At the low price, they demand a lot. But suppliers only supply quantity supplied. So that's what they actually get. Society's worse off. They've got less quantity than they had before due to the price ceiling. I know H and J is all deadweight loss. I know FGI is all consumer surplus because everything above the price, everything below the demand curve. This K is producer surplus. So consumer surplus is FGI. We got 2 of those. Producer surplus is just K. Now I know it's got to be D. And I can see the deadweight loss is H and J. I hope that makes sense to you. Recognize it, draw them, have the definitions in your head, draw it a few times, label everything for the graph, and you should be pretty good to go for price floors and price ceilings. Just don't let them trick you. All right. Almost, I think this is the last one, 2012. Let's do it. In the market depicted in the diagram above, if the government imposes a price ceiling at $1, now it's a price ceiling, it is below equilibrium. I know floors are high, and I know ceilings are low. The more you get that in your head, the better. Kind of think of it as the opposite of what we know to be true, but price ceilings are low, floors are high. However you got to do to keep that in your head to be effective in binding. So it's an effective price ceiling, which is the final result. Looks like I start at 1, I go straight across, I hit the supply curve, I go down. $6 is the quantity supplied. Tick, 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 tick. Oops, right there is where I hit the demand curve. $12 is the quantity demanded. I know quantity demand is 12, quantity supply is 6. Quantity demand is greater than quantity supplied. I know we have a shortage. So I can get rid of anything that says a surplus or neither. I know it's effective or binding. It is effective. So I know E doesn't make sense. Now, it went from 6 to what we usually had was 10. Now it went to 6, right? The demand for this good at that low price of $1 is 12, and the supply of that good is 6. We have a shortage of 6 billion gallons. Can we see that? How we figured that out? Easy enough. You can see the shortage there. I think this is our last one. I'm just going to add, if this had been a price floor instead, I'm going to change my color here. If they had put a price floor in here, it should be recognizable to you what's going on. But if this had been our price floor at $2, we would have recognized that that's our demand curve that we just bumped into. So that right there, the 8 would have been our quantity demanded. And then the 14 would have been our quantity supplied. They would have been supplying more than was demanded, so there would have been a surplus. And the surplus is just the difference between the two, 8, 9, 10. So there would have been a surplus of 6. Now, they were hoping you'd be confused, right? Maybe you wouldn't know what's going on, but we're not confused at all. We know price floors, right, lead to surpluses. We know price ceilings lead to shortages. That would have helped us. All right, guys, that's quick and dirty, but those are the only released price floors and price ceiling questions. Not a lot, but you got a good sort of sampling here of what's going on. A lot of unreleased questions. If you need my help, I'm on Wisant. You're just looking for Charles W. All right, take care, be safe, keep working hard, and I'll see you soon. Bye.